Hey, it's Lauren here. Welcome to the show. Today I spoke with Esther Edwards and we talked about being an intuitive and an introvert and navigating the crazy world of marketing, sales, business, which is very often geared for extroverted people. We talked about Esther's journey. We talked about social media, telling your authentic story. When is it too much? TMI. Do you need to, in fact, tell it all? We talked about the importance of confidence and showing up as your authentic self. It's all here in the episode, and there's some great stuff for you. Enjoy. This episode's been brought to you by the Raw Spirit team. Growing your business is just the beginning. Too many business owners try to grow their business on their own. They spend countless hours testing out and investing in hundreds of strategies, all with the aim of building their business. Without support, someone helping to guide you and cheering you on, motivation starts to go down. Your passion starts to decrease. You start running out of money and losing faith in your business and yourself. The Raw Spirit team is a supportive community filled with expert programming, up-to-date training, guest experts, mentorship, and like-minded business owners. This isn't another community and another strategy. This is a serious and supportive community of business owners focused on supporting each other and building their business. You are welcome here. All right, welcome to the show. My guest today is Esther Edwards. Esther is the community host for therapists and well-being women who want to live as their most whole selves. I'm going to start that one more time. My guest today is Esther Edwards. Esther is the community host for therapists and well-being women who want to live as their most whole selves while they guide their clients to do the same. She helps thoughtful and intuitive women of every healing modality to unfurl their entrepreneurial wings and take flight in their meaningful business. She founded the Therapy Roost and Wellbeing Women Club to support therapists to overcome overwhelm and combine purposeful success with making a difference. Esther is a relaxed therapist and adventurous homebody who lives surrounded by the rolling hills of the UK countryside. She's joining me today to talk about navigating a rather loud and daunting landscape as an intuitive, how to be your authentic self in a world largely dominated by extroverts, and how to gain confidence and grow your skills in a way that is authentic to you. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Esther.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful introduction. That's very kind.
You have such a beautiful piece of art behind you. It kind of looks like it's inspired by Monet. It kind of goes with your whole like tranquil, intuitive kind of vibe that I'm getting from your bio.
I do have to be in a relaxing space. I have to be surrounded. In order to feel grounded, I have to be surrounded by beauty somehow. And nature is really important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because actually this wasn't part of my line of questioning at all, but you've brought it up. I mean, your environment is really such a place where you can be nurtured and refilled, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what's not always clear from video is just what a small section of my house this is. So this is my sort of recording zone, but really speaking anywhere, I think, in our home where we can just bring the outdoors inside and feel that grounding sense of peace, which, all plant material and all of nature can give us is definitely where I'm at anyway.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so let's go back for a minute, kind of start. I'm not going to say at the very beginning because, it's probably not really necessary, but I do know that you spent 10 years running your own clinic as a sensitive and intuitive therapist. So what first attracted you to the world of therapy, and how common is it to be a sensitive and intuitive, therapist? Is that like a real niche down area?
Yeah, sure. Well, if we go right back to the start, when I graduated school, I had been unwell as a child for most of my life. And part of that was illnesses which were eventually resolved, which I was incredibly grateful for. But also, I'd had illnesses that directly related to my sensitivity that were really undiagnosed. So, being a more sensitive person, being highly sensitive on a spectrum of sensitivity is, it's sometimes diagnosable, but more often than not, folks are just struggling with overwhelm, and they find themselves in healing modalities and professions because that's where they feel most at peace, working one-to-one with other people, and also being very in tune with themselves and what makes them feel at ease and what overwhelms them. And therapeutic settings are great for that. So being sensitive in this field of work is not uncommon at all. But it took me 10 years in a completely different career before I made it into this one. So when I left school because of my ill health, I knew that I absolutely did not want to be in a classroom. I did not want to be surrounded by the buzz of computers and the hum of even heating. I just wanted to be outdoors in nature as much as possible. So I went and I studied sciences and plants, and I became a horticulturalist. And then I found myself surrounded by the hum of computers as an environmental consultant. And I did that for about 10 years, and the recession came in 2009, and we're now experiencing another type of recession, so it'll be interesting to see how many folks change career again. But when that recession came, I saw it as my opportunity to leave something I had trained a long time for, and really give myself permission to try something new. Obviously it was stressful leaving a career and jumping into something different, but for me it was a gift of not having to be competitive in an office culture, and to really look at what would nourish me and nurture my soul, and also what I could truly give to. Because in a field that doesn't really suit you anymore, you're always operating on the back foot. So for me to change was a gift, and that's how I changed career. I found many different types of therapy and eventually settled on one. And it was about 10 years ago, just under 10 years ago, that I retrained. And now I support others in their work as well.
So how did you decide to go from having your own clinic to deciding to help others? Did you recognize that, maybe if you help others, you can actually maybe reach more people than you could just one-on-one with clients? Was that part of the thinking process, or was it just time for a new chapter?
I'd like to say it was as strategic as that, but actually, early on in my career, I just found that once I'd qualified in this therapy that I thought would bring me home to using my natural skills in the world, as well as the discipline that I had learned and trained for, that I was struggling to market myself, because marketing and advertising my business was another loud, complex, often verbose environment to be in, whether it's online or whether it's in person. And so although I'd like to say I wanted to reach more people, really it was just a way of figuring things out for myself, deciding, was I going to make a living out of my therapy, or was I going to actually just do it as a part-time thing, or was I going to give up altogether? Was I actually not made to make money off of this discipline that I loved? And by figuring out how I could market myself, how I could advertise and reach my clients in a way that felt calm and came naturally to me, I sort of developed my own strategy for marketing. And slowly over 10 years, I found other therapists that were struggling the same as me, because we are usually of one ilk. We're usually sensitive folks, possibly more introverted, but not always. And we used to chat at networking events and at professional development. And they would say to me, but how are you doing it? How are you sustaining your business? How do you seem so energized? And so we would just have a chat and share those potential outcomes. And it grew very organically. And so, yes, now I show others the way to how I found to sustain my business. And that has grown into a community where actually many women support each other. And I am just the host of that. And it's a gift. And it's a very different type of work to working one-on-one with clients. But that is very much still where my passion is. It's in championing other women to reach their clients, because I think the world needs sensitive therapists. And if we don't find a way to put ourselves out there, then the folks that are most intuitive and are going to help the population to heal are not going to have their voice.
Yeah, no, I think that's so right. And one thing that stood out for me when you were talking was that, there's probably a lot of people that haven't learned how to balance or cleanse or, put boundaries in place, and that potentially they have had to give up the work that they love doing, because some of those things they didn't know about them, or they didn't have anybody to kind of guide them there. So, it does make me think about how, often it's not really talked about how intuitiveness or being really sensitive is a really subject in the business world, in fact.
Mm.
And yet it's pretty common that a lot of people do tend to be, they talk about overwhelm and burnout. And I think sometimes people think it's equated to the amount of hours they're putting in, but it could just be because they just haven't learned how to balance their energy or how to refill their own cup, so to speak.
Definitely. I mean, for me, it was a case of identifying the environments that I knew would be exhausting, that I knew would be tiring. And it
Yeah.
was either putting action steps in place after I'd been in those environments to de-stress and come back to center, or more often than not, and what I suggest now to folks is that they find environments that actually fuel them. So for me, it's no longer about going into what feels like a lion's den and coping as best you can. It's actually about recreating a new strategy for yourself to market yourself in ways that you feel at ease in, you feel relaxed
Yeah.
in, because why should we always go into loud spaces and be the quietest person in the room? Let's reimagine how the quietest person in the room can actually command the attention for that skill, for that gift, rather than putting ourselves in an environment that's not going to show our voice and our message to the best.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to talk to you a little bit later about how you do market intuitively. You kind of sort of have talked a little bit about it, but maybe you have some tips and tricks for our listener at home. But kind of before we get to that, let's go back to the concept of being your whole self, because I know that you mentioned helping women to live as their whole selves. And I guess I want to know, how do you define living as your whole self? And I mean, how do you know when you're actually doing that?
Mm. I think living as one's whole self, there's many different definitions for it. For me, one of the things that stood out for me in the past was I particularly loved it when Brené Brown described being courageous as not necessarily equating to bravery, but equating to wholeheartedness.
Yeah.
And she described that, to just do something wholeheartedly is the most courageous act. And so wholeness for me is about going all in with who we are naturally. And so that's why I talk about finding environments to work in and market ourselves in that are where we can be our most whole selves and not have to fit into a pigeonhole of where we think we may or may not be accepted or acceptable.
Right.
So wholeness for me is about identifying areas where we're perhaps struggling to be our most whole selves and healing those. And there may be many different dots that join up throughout our lives where we have pocketed away a part of ourselves in order to cope, or because it's not necessarily necessary to our business. But I think as self-employed women, we need to really oftentimes bring our whole selves to the table in order to feel most grounded. And so there's a whole real looking at ourselves and healing of ourselves that goes on when we stare at a camera and we see ourselves back, and we know our clients are doing the same. And it's all the same stuff will come up when we're self-employed as when we're sitting in therapy. It's a really intense experience to be in business.
Yeah, it is. And I do want to talk to you in a minute a little bit about the importance of authenticity and I guess relatability too, but primarily authenticity. Before we get to that though, can wholeness be different for different people? And also, can your definition for yourself of wholeness change over time? Because as we learn and grow, I would imagine that your definition of wholeness 5, 10 years ago might not be the exact same version as it is now, as you begin to step even more into your power and your authentic self.
So we're always evolving, right? And my
Yeah.
therapist early on used to say to me, "You don't know what you don't know yet," and
Yeah.
that was a gift. Thank goodness we don't always know what we're going to be struggling with in future, because we we either haven't we either haven't become aware of it yet, or we have that blind spot. And so certainly, I think our whole selves does hopefully evolve. We do hopefully continue to look and see what we can work on, how we can become um, better human beings to each other and to ourselves.
Yeah.
Your second question.
Oh, I guess it was pretty much connected to that. I guess like wholeness could be different for different people, right? Your
Right.
definition of wholeness might modify or might be slightly different from my definition of wholeness. And that's
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes along with our life experiences and our um, sort of natural quirks and personality traits that we have.
Yeah.
You know, not everybody's going to want to be self-developing, self-analyzing their whole lives. We're going to
Yeah.
go through periods where we've got other priorities, and then as therapists we're going to have times where we need to grow certain aspects of our business, and others where we can just be fully involved with our clients. So wholeness for me is about feeling true and grounded in who you are whilst you're doing the work that you love. It's about not feeling scattered, not feeling that you have disparate parts of yourself all over the place, and that your business is just one aspect of your life.
Yeah.
Self-employment and entrepreneurism, I think, it becomes a part of who you are because you're thinking about it all of the time. And having great boundaries is so key to relaxing away from that. But wholeness is about bringing who we are to the table when it comes to being self-employed, I think, and freelancing.
I think sometimes we feel that, we're not good enough, and, the imposter syndrome that gets kicked around a lot. But I mean, it does, because it's true. A lot of people forget that, where they are is enough, that they are good enough, that they have something worthy and valuable to say. And, do you kind of help women to, I guess, understand that their point of view is important, that their story is important, and even if they're not the loudest in the room, that their words are still worth hearing?
Absolutely. I think imposter syndrome is responsible for a large proportion, I'd say a large reason why um, therapists simply don't continue in business, or they retire and they do it as a hobby, or they decide that they don't want to monetize their therapy. And
Right.
I find that terribly sad, because there's a kind of there's a pseudo humility, right, in saying, I don't want to monetize my therapy. I never got into this because I wanted to make a living. Well, okay, no, you're naturally intuitive. I get it. I get that you can't help but be this way towards people, and people are probably drawn to you
Right.
for who you are.
Yeah.
But we all need to eat, and
Yeah.
why work in a job that isn't suited to your gifts when actually you could be really supporting others to live their best lives and making a living at the same time.
Yeah.
So imposter syndrome for me looked like compartmentalizing my oversensitivity, or how it had been perceived by others as oversensitivity throughout my corporate career, and always feeling, like I said earlier, on the back foot, always feeling like that was a part of my personality that was not required for the role
Mm.
at hand. And when I transitioned into being in business, my imposter syndrome reared its head again, because I hadn't really embraced my sensitivity. I'd embraced that I was naturally intuitive, and I'd become a therapist based on my love of working with people, and that empathy that you get to express, and
Yeah.
the empathicness that we naturally have as well. But I hadn't actually realized that I needed to heal uh, those words of being oversensitive in order to not feel like an imposter.
Yeah. I love that. Well said. And I do want to go back to what you were talking about before for a minute. It's a little bit off subject, I suppose, but I just think it's important. It is totally okay to get money for working. I mean, like you said, we need to eat. Also, some of us want to have homes, in the forest, right?
Yeah,
So how else are you supposed to afford doing that? So it's also an exchange of energy, right? It goes to the
absolutely.
whole concept of, I think anyway, when you're giving, you need to receive something back. So it's an exchange of energy because otherwise it's unbalanced.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back, yeah, I think it relates back to when you've had a gift or when you've had a sense of who you are since you were very, very small, which often in this sort of entrepreneurial space, we've always wanted to be doing something slightly different, if we're that way inclined. And certainly if we consider ourselves very spiritually aware or intuitively aware, then it's something that we haven't grown up sort of educating ourselves into. We've just always been. And so to have a job in that setting or have a
Yeah.
role in that setting, if we've not had perhaps a guide or a mentor that we've seen accepting money in exchange for what comes naturally to us, it can seem like the two don't go together. It can seem
Yeah.
like it's too easy, right? It's
Yeah.
too easy to just be who we are and for folks to use their hard-earned cash to pay us for who we are. And that's the imposter
Yeah.
syndrome that comes from the name. That's the imposter syndrome about,
Yeah.
who we are is actually not enough. Whereas actually who we are is the gift. And I don't misunderstand, as therapists, we need education. We need to prove that our skills have been
Yeah.
tested in some way often. And we work to a code of ethics. And, even if our skills aren't necessarily required by law to be under a particular set of guidelines, and actually we can work in the freedom of being a coach or a healer, we still need to address oftentimes, I think, our own feelings about accepting money for what we offer. And it's an offering, like you say, it's an exchange of
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, and I mean, I often hear like when people hear about people, who might be mediums or healers, like you said, there's kind of an implied, exactly what you said. Well, why wouldn't they charge for that? It must not be real, or it must, right? Because they're just born with it. But it's not true. I mean, anybody who understands this industry or these kind of modalities, they know you have to work at cultivating those relationships and understanding that the language that you're learning, like anybody who's a medium or a psychic, like often they're trying to learn an entirely new language that's only for themselves, and that takes time and patience and perseverance. So it's not as though, even if you're intuitive, it doesn't mean that it necessarily, is happening for you and that you're all ready to go right away.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think, like as you pointed out, imposter syndrome is a very, very real thing. And until we
Yeah.
really grab a hold of that and reparent ourselves and tell ourselves that it's okay, if we've not had a guide or a mentor tell us that it's okay, the way that you are is not only okay, but it's okay to have a monetary energy exchange for that gift.
So how do you define your intuition? We're talking a lot about how you help work with intuitives. I guess what I'm trying to figure out here is, how do you know if you're an intuitive, I suppose? How do you know if you kind of fit into our conversation? So let's start
Mm.
off by going, how do you define intuition, and then work from there?
Mm. So great question. So I think everybody has intuition. I think is essentially what it boils down to is we all have it. I think some of us have it more developed than others. We come born more developed with our intuition than others, and I think that we can also learn to use it and learn to really utilize it. So intuition for me is testing out and sensing if what I perceive from others is accurate. And having been intuitive my whole life, having really had an awareness of that, I oftentimes now know whether my intuition is off or whether it's accurate. And what I found most helpful over the years when discerning whether my intuition is accurate or whether it's actually something that I really want to happen is is whether or not I am invested in it. So when we're manifesting, right, when we're praying for something that we really want to happen, one of the key elements of that process is that we have to let go of the outcome. We have to actually ask and then be open to receiving in whatever form it comes. And so for me, intuition and knowing that intuition is accurate is going to be about letting go of an outcome. And also, I'm most intuitive when it's others and not myself. So whilst it's a skill, I think that can be definitely increased and learned and practiced even, I am most intuitive for others and not for myself, because I have no investment in whether or not it comes true or not. It extends to if it's somebody close to me and I really want it to happen for them, my intuition can be a bit
Right, that's so interesting, because you're like, you can be, so for example, if you were picking up something for me, yeah, you might think I'm a nice person, but you're not, it doesn't really, I'm not really going to affect your life. So it's kind of like, you can be objective with whatever it is you tell me. But if it's your family member who you've known for 35 years and you really want them to get this great job, and all of a sudden you could be getting mixed messages. You could even be picking up on them, considering you could be more connected to them,
Exactly. I mean, there's a difference here, isn't there, between being psychic and being intuitive. So people with psychic abilities, which I don't have, are often able to completely discern what they perceive to be truth directly from a messenger or messages. Intuition, I think, very much comes from ourselves and how we are perceiving a situation, and that is very open to suggestion. And I think that we have to be very, very clear on how we're starting our day and why we want a particular outcome in order to know whether it's accurate or not.
Yes. I love that you brought up the whole thought or the whole concept of letting go of the outcome, because, especially when you talk about manifestation or praying and things like that, we forget sometimes that we also need to trust that everything is working out as it's meant to. And sometimes when you plant the seed of what you will or what you're wanting to have happen, to kind of allowing the universe to deliver that for you in the way that it's meant to come. So I just wanted to reinforce that, because I think sometimes, especially in business, right? We want to control everything. I have my measurable goals. I'm trying to tick all of these boxes, but then all of a sudden, something happens and we're led on a completely different course.
Absolutely. And I think that was never more prevalent than when Instagram and Facebook introduced analytics. So we might have a social media presence. We're gonna dive in and we're gonna do it because we know that that's the way to reach our clients. Never mind the fact that that might be fairly overwhelming to start with if you're not comfortable in that environment at first. But then all of a sudden you start a business account and you've got the ability to see who's reading every single one of your posts, where they live, what their demographic is. And that again can be an overwhelming experience. And I think it's really important to allow ourselves our natural voice regardless of those sorts of analytics as well.
So let's head into the conversation now about authenticity. And I guess we can't really talk too much about authenticity without kind of knowing a bit more about the modalities that you do help. So can you kind of talk about some of the people that you are working with? You have talked about healers. We have talked about psychics, mediums. Are these some of the people you work with? Do you work with, people who are hypnotherapists, theta healers, Reiki, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Wellbeing Women Club was founded because the therapy roost does not just mean clinical therapist. So I myself trained in a physical therapy, and in my sort of training over the years, I've met so many different types of therapists, and we all essentially are working with either the same goal or the same struggle. And so within the community, now I have therapists who are nutritionists, psychotherapists, counsellors, health coaches, life coaches, movement therapists, yoga teachers, and healing modalities, energy therapists, like you were discussing.
Hmm.
And I love that variety and the essentially similar personality traits that we have, and the similar things that we need to overcome and actually embrace and integrate into ourselves and into our businesses.
Okay, cool. I love that. It's actually, yeah, good, because I know that, the thing that all those people have in common is they based a lot of intuition, a lot of the work that they do, and they're of service to other people who are often potentially in crisis, some of them, or struggling with challenges, and that could be said for people going to yoga and people, trying to get their nutrition on track. So it all kind of correlates together. So let's go into the importance of authenticity. So when I think about marketing, and, we're kind of talking about how it's really a sort of an extroverted world out there, with loud people and, lots of noise and things like that. And then you mentioned the Instagram, Facebook algorithms. So again, we're needing to get through all this noise. It might not be loud like in a room of people, but it's pretty loud at the same time when you think about it. Authenticity is one of the most important things I feel in marketing your business. And yet it's one of the most challenging things at the same time, because also depending on the kind of industry that you're in, you're kind of putting yourself in the, I don't know, in the line of fire, I suppose you could say. And, I'm not saying that yoga teachers or nutritionists don't have it tough, but if you're a medium and you say that you can speak with people who have passed, you might be dealing with criticism in a different way than something that's a little bit more mainstream. So do you have any thoughts kind of on how you can be authentic and how you can kind of, I guess, stand out in that noise and almost, I don't know, not let fear take you over from being who you truly are?
Oh, it's so powerful to not let fear take you over from who you are. Fantastic.
Just an
Okay,
easy question, no problem.
so there are many leading thought leaders who will say, fear cannot have a front seat in the driving car. Okay, so this is not a new thought, right? But having said that, that's really very difficult when we can be bombarded directly into our direct messages or our inbox with folks criticizing a very innate ability that we might have. Because then it becomes incredibly personal. So the key is to firstly not read those comments when they come in. They're not essential. They're certainly not feedback too. If you feel you need to delete a comment from your thread or from your feed because it does not fit with your work, go for it. This is your space. This is your home. This is your business.
Yes.
You do not need to have that kind of negativity. Having said that, I think that there are ways in which we can learn from other people's opinions in our online and our business presence. And sometimes you may wish to actually address and reply to an area in which a reader of yours thinks that you have a blind spot, and you may use it as an opportunity to set the record straight or to express or explain your particular perspective. But in protecting ourselves and in working for a business which is essentially a gift and a blessing to us, because don't forget, we're leading our businesses for ourselves. This is our responsibility to train others how to treat us. It's all about preparation for me. It's about being confident in the side of myself that I am prepared to share. And if I share something that feels vulnerable or that feels very raw, in the case of people who are sharing their intuition straight out there, perhaps unfiltered, then it's a case of being prepared for when those eventualities happen and we get negative feedback, and having as much of a balance outside of life as inside that business setting, so that we're always supported and we're always feeling grounded and we always have perspective. As entrepreneurs and as self-employed business people, this can consume a lot of our working week and a lot of our thinking week when we're not technically working. And it's so critical to have those support systems and that downtime away from that environment as well.
I love everything you just said, especially about non-essential feedback.
Mm.
It's like haters, it's non-essential feedback. You don't need to take it on.
No,
And,
exactly.
yeah, and it's kind of like your home. You're right. I don't want this negative comment here. I don't want this person pitching their product or whatever. Just delete that
Mm.
and don't think much about it. And,
Mm.
I guess when you were speaking, it made me sort of think about how, especially in the social media landscape, and when we talk about authenticity, I think there's sometimes a misconnection with being authentic and telling everyone everything. We don't
Mm.
need to tell everyone everything. Would you agree that we can keep our private lives separate? Sometimes we can, I guess, share things if we feel comfortable and we want to do that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
at the same time, we don't have to be authentic, right?
Right. So, yeah, this is really quite a big topic in my community because I think when we are especially new to expressing ourselves in a way that feels vulnerable, which being in business often does, it often feels exposing.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is a sense of wanting to connect with others, and even it can slip into a kind of needing to be accepted by others. So we put our raw and our real story out there, perhaps on our About Me page, and we say, accept me or don't accept me, or even connect with me or don't connect with me, because there is a lot of extroverted marketing which teaches us that in order to um, be our most true selves and connect with folks, we need to tell that one really, really special story
Yeah.
that will connect and will cut through all of the other noise, and just our right clients will find us. And the problem I have with this is that it's often purported by experts who don't have quite the vulnerability that introverted, intuitive folks might already have been living with their whole life. So there is a different level of vulnerability and rawness and realness in terms of our stories than there is with people who have learned to have perhaps a professional work life and then this one story that's going to connect with their clients. So I hope that's making sense. But my tip for expressing perhaps a story that resonates without telling your soul would be to have a story that your client or your ideal client is going to find touches them and reaches them in a way that benefits and takes them on a stage from where they were feeling alone to now you understand them. So in my business, it's not actually necessary for, although it might relate hugely to my community, it's not actually necessary to talk about a lot of my past pain and difficulty in being seen as oversensitive and not feeling like I belonged anywhere, because
Yeah.
we all naturally get that. We all know what that feels like. All I need to do is say to somebody, I often was misunderstood for being oversensitive. Bing, we all understand. There's a natural resonance there. So definitely protecting your story so that you have a sense of I use the word a lot, but groundedness and a distance. I think there does have to be, whilst we're being authentic, of course, there does have to be a distance between us and the people that we're serving. It's all part of professional boundaries.
Yeah, but I think what you hit the nail on the head, because I think that, sometimes people feel they need to tell more than they're even comfortable with or more than they want to, because they want to show that they have a right to be in the space they're in.
Mm.
Like, I overcame this big thing. That's why I can tell you how to overcome your big thing, because I did it too. But I mean, sometimes that's not going to be the case. And also sometimes it doesn't matter, because the past doesn't define us when we are who we are now. So like
Mm.
rehashing that and going back into those, the traumas or the adversity or whatever it is that we've overcome,
Mm.
I think sometimes, like you said, it might not be relevant anymore. I know you didn't say relevant, but I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, I suppose. But is it really necessary? Does it really connect with your message now, if that one story does, sort of thing?
Mm. I think there's a really interesting couple of points that you mention about whether or not it resonates, and also how relevant it is. There's a difficulty between wanting to remain wanting to remain connected to our audience, and also jostling for position. We need to be mindful that we are resonating whilst also at the same time being true. So there is a false vulnerability with sharing too much of ourselves in order that we feel seen and understood and validated. Right. So if our businesses, we are looking to be validated by our audience, then we are always going to potentially be oversharing in a way that's going to feel, I describe it as feeling like we're free falling. The therapy roost was named as such because it's a safe place for birds to consider their next steps and to take flight from. And in extroverted environments, particularly like social media, that's visually very extroverted and loud, I always felt like I was free falling. How could I catch myself and take flight in a way where I didn't feel like I was out of control? And if we're oversharing, or if we are not thinking about what's resonating and more wanting to be accepted, then there's always going to be that free falling sensation, and it's a really unpleasant place to be, right? It's not a nice feeling when we are not sure when the wind is going to catch us and we're going to soar again. We're essentially fighting for our lives in that.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone realizes that's the case. Like I quit social media about 5 years ago or so now, and then I had to get it again for work. But I set up a private business page, and that's all I do is I do that for work. I don't use it personally because personally I couldn't do it. I was like getting way too involved. I was getting way too affected. And for me, it did not suit me. So I think part of that comes down to, kind of what I'd like to go into now, which is about boundaries, understanding your own journey, understanding what's going to lift you up, what's going to take you away. And I think that was so well put when you talked about a false sense of vulnerability. It's almost like a showmanship, right? Hey, here's my war wound, here's my badge of honor that tells me that, lets that, this is what I'm all about, when really that might not actually be authentic, even if it seems like it's vulnerable. So anyway, I went off a tangent there, but let's go back to the boundaries conversation.
No, I think it's essential what you said, if I might just interrupt, because who are we communicating with there? Who are we trying to prove ourselves to? And I think I've definitely experienced that myself. I've wanted to explain, to justify, and it's actually been myself that I'm trying to, prove myself to. It's about standing on that middle ground of not needing to overshare and also not needing to shrink away, but actually just knowing yourself, who you are, and how that will connect with others.
So I guess sometimes, when I was talking there about my relationship with social media, I felt drained a lot. And I felt that, I think I was being preoccupied with things that didn't really nurture my soul. So I kind of had to make some decisions about whether or not that was serving me. And so I made the decision that it wasn't serving me anymore. And I took measures in place to, to leave social media. So that's just an example, I guess, of when I've been able to use boundaries or be aware of, how they were affecting me. So how do you recommend somebody sort of listen to themselves to be aware whether or not something is serving them? And then I guess in a way have the courage to listen to that guidance.
Excellent. So listening to ourselves comes back down to how often we do that. So if we don't have a daily meditation practice or a daily listening to what is essentially comfortable for us, where we feel at peace and we can give of ourselves in the best possible way, then we're not really going to know. We're always going to be in that fight or flight pattern. So hearing from ourselves and listening to ourselves is a whole nother topic. But having boundaries in terms of social media and knowing what's right for ourselves is just that. It's a really, really personal thing. And knowing what's appropriate and when to put those in place is tricky in business, because we are trying to meet our clients where they're at, where they engage with us the most. And so if we need to go into those spaces, we were chatting earlier about how you may not use Facebook personally now, but you still recognize that you need it for your work. About having boundaries in place whereby You can utilize that system. You can operate within it whilst having your own set of criteria, what you will and will not share, the time that you will and will not go on there for. I think
Yeah.
it's these systems are so huge that there's a sensation that we're going to be lost and we're going to be swept up in them. But they're very much tools for us. And just because they are so large doesn't mean that we can't very, very specifically target the way that we reach folks and the way that they interact with us. It's not necessary to have your comments on, for example. You can post and you can inform. You don't necessarily need to receive feedback on it. That can be done on Facebook and Instagram. And whilst engagement, yes, it does help ratings, it does help reach, you can very much put your toe in the water and decide how much you want to engage in these tools.
Yeah, I like that a lot because what you're talking about is, again, going back to the wholeness where you're understanding what's right for you on your journey and what you're comfortable with. Because, when you're in business, it's so important that you're honoring your own journey because you're in business, hopefully for the long term, if you want to be. And, making sure that you're nurturing your truth every step of the way is going to, essentially ensure that you're going to be able to stay in business, isn't it? Not burn out and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think nurturing oneself and growing oneself is very much a part of being in business. It doesn't matter about, increasing qualifications even. It's about finding a longevity for your message. And if you have a message that is beyond the next client, the next client, the next client, it's actually something broader. It's what your life is about. Why are you doing what you do? And that's a lot easier, a lot more purposeful to sustain.
So let's get into, whether or not you have any tips or tricks for how to market intuitively. You've kind of talked about it already. I did love how you sort of mentioned turning off the comments. I did love how you talked about, you know, honoring, the stories that you want to share and being really clear on, is my target demographic, is my target audience, are they interested in this story? Is that going to connect to them? And that's kind of enough. Are there other things that you kind of recommend that people do? Is intuitive marketing more than just social media as well?
Oh, absolutely. So intuitive marketing is everything from the way that we take our photograph to the way that we have our website. So to be intuitive is for me to resonate with the person that I am aiming to serve. So it's intuitively knowing what they will be struggling with, which is essentially an earlier version of myself. In terms of being a therapist or a spiritual person, that person may not be experiencing something that you have, but you will no doubt be able to relate or empathize with the feelings, because all the feelings that we experience as human beings are essentially similar. We've all experienced a sense of not belonging, feeling alone, feeling unheard, feeling unseen,
Yeah.
feeling misunderstood. And so the way that we craft our website, the way that we take our photograph in an engaging way, in a way that feels open, we have an openness to the way that we express ourselves that invites an authenticity and a vulnerability from our clients in return. And one of the things that I do in one of the programs is to guide people how to create a website that feels open and engaging, rather than just a list of qualifications or a list of testimonials. Let's talk about a resonant story that you have. It doesn't have to be, that spiritual awakening story. It can just be something resonant with your clients, and then really expand upon that in a way that expresses to your client that you understand them.
I think that, from what you were saying there, it kind of just made me feel as though sometimes in the world of business, especially in the world of marketing, we feel like we need to compete with everyone at the same level that they're at. And it's not true. And there's always going to be something for everybody else, right? I mean, you're going to connect with somebody for a certain reason, and I'm going to connect with somebody for a certain reason. That means there's enough to go around. I guess it comes down to the abundance mindset. But when you're not doing that whole comparison, when you're running your own race and you're staying the course of, where your journey needs to go, maybe some of these decisions that you're kind of talking about will come naturally as well if you're not worried about needing to play in the same arena in the same way.
Exactly. I completely agree. I think there is a sensation, there's a sensationalism about um, resonating with other business owners, but not working with someone who does exactly what you do, because you couldn't possibly be friends and be competing for exactly the same clients, right?
Right.
Well, I think that's a myth. I think that, you know, psychotherapists can be friends with psychotherapists. I think that
Yeah.
crystal healers can be friends with other crystal healers. You can
Yeah.
both own a shop and you can both market to the same clients, because your
Yeah.
individual personality, your individual energy is going to resonate slightly differently with slightly different people at different stages of their life. So somebody
Yes.
might take a course over here with this therapist, and then they might also take a course later in their business with this therapist. And the fact that energetically we're
Yes.
all working together and we want the best for each other is why my community sustains itself. It is non-competitive. You know, therapists and healers in any field, we've been alone long enough. We've been struggling with usually with our high sensitivity, with our sense of identity perhaps, for long enough, if we've
Yeah.
not had a guide yet on our journey. And we really need each other. And so my work is very much about doing business differently. It's not about having a networking system amongst our therapists, although clients do naturally get referred around
Yeah.
sort of network that know each other, but it's more about a building up of each other and a championing of each other, because we innately understand each other, right? We get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we do. And I think it's so important because, you know, one of the entrepreneurs that I follow, his name's Gary V. I don't know if you've heard of him, Gary Vaynerchuk. Do you know him?
Yeah.
So he's a very intense person, and he
Mm,
puts out, you know, he talks about putting out 50 to 100 pieces of content every day. And it's just not going to be at the same level as what a lot of us are at. And, you know, I think that sometimes, you know, you can't help but feel like you're not even in the same race. But at the same time, you know, when you're connecting with like-minded people, when you're in your own safe communities, in your safe worlds, and you're, you know, still promoting yourself and your business, and you're, you know, you're just coming at it from a position of grace and love, you don't need to even think about what else is happening. And you're right, like, you know, just going back to reinforce the same thing, I guess, is that there's something for everybody.
absolutely. I think it's really quite tricky to imagine on the ground level how that would work if you're in a small town and you're seeing clients one to one. But early on in my career, I went and literally knocked on the door. No, I phoned up a therapist in my hometown and I said, I'm training, I'm a newbie, assuming that she would want to meet me and would want to nurture me and would want to mentor me, because, you know, when we're plucky and we're new in our field, we assume that someone who's already doing
Yeah.
it is going to want to be nurturing of us. And
Yeah.
perhaps it was just my naivety.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I happened upon an extremely spiritual, very, very good friend of mine now of 10
Mm.
years, who, Jan Kafiro, who is subsequently becoming and has a new website, forest bathing practitioner called Feel Good Forest Bathing. And she said to me, there is enough general public to go around. Now, that might seem like a really, really ordinary phrase,
No,
but
I love that. General public to go around. It's so good.
her permission to me in our relatively small town in the UK was, I am not threatened by you. You needn't be in competition with me. We can lift each other up. We can refer to each other. We can be friends with each other. You know, it's essential to have an equality in business with other therapists. We actually come at our modality very differently. We have very different backgrounds. We offer our clients a very different experience. And yet we can sit and chat over lunch for hours and we're very, very similar. So that on a very, very practical level, we worry about that. But also in the online space, we can waste an awful lot of time comparing our website, comparing our design, comparing the quality of our recording, comparing, you know, what microphone we're using or what video we're using to record
Yeah.
on. And it really doesn't matter. What matters is the connection that we have with our clients and whether somebody is resonating with us.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. Because even when I started this podcast, I had a nice microphone, but I was recording it in my office. And it was so echoey, and I was obsessing about the sound not being very good. And then I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to record it in my bedroom using not my expensive mic that had my partner fashion to my desk or anything. I'm just going to use my iPhone headphones and let it roll, because it's about the message I need to do. I'm not going to like worry too much about
Absolutely.
all the other stuff that's stopping me from speaking my truth. So,
Exactly, it's the message and it's reaching somebody. And if it's too perfect, I'll never forget it. Somebody said this to me, if it's too perfect, it's not resonating. It was a photographer, actually. Yeah, I have an interest in art and design, and photography was my background. And this photographer said, it's great putting out the most beautiful airbrushed, let's say, wedding photography photo that you've taken. But if the next bride can't relate to feeling like that on her wedding day because the last photograph that you took was of a model-esque, airbrushed,
right.
so the photograph, then she's not going to feel that you are the right person for her. And so this is why it's really, really important that we get testimonials from our clients that are in their own words, and that we're not shy about sharing the transformation and the change that our clients have had. One of the things I noticed in my community is that therapists and healers are shy of asking people to recommend their work, because again, it's a humility about what comes naturally to them. But it's really, really key that people read in very, very easy to understand and relate to language, how they might
Yes.
benefit from what we do.
Yes. And that's such a gift, what you've just said, because that's what people are going to connect to. They're going to connect to your marketing in their own words. And
Absolutely.
yeah, your testimonials are chock full of that information. So definitely use them. All right. Well, we're coming up to the hour, Esther. I feel like we just got started. This always
We could chat.
happens to me. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share? Did you kind of get through all your tips? I know we talked way more about marketing, way more about other things than we did about marketing. But I really think that being able to market intuitively really does come down with you understanding your own story, your relationship with wholeness, understanding abundance mindset, a lot of the things that we kind of covered off here. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to throw in now? And also, how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, that's very kind of you. So the community is at thetherapyroost.com, where we have a Wellbeing Women Club that's open periodically, but also there's loads of free resources there. And I guess the essential message that I've gleaned from working with you today and from our lovely conversation, which I think could go on forever,
Yeah, for sure.
with all the things that are relevant to both of our fields, is that we engage most by speaking to our clients in a way that they feel seen and heard. And I think that that's the essential message that I have learned so far, and that I have for therapists and wellbeing women like me and like us, is that it's about getting out of our own way sometimes and reaching out to the person that needs what we have to offer.
Yeah, and then releasing the outcome and trusting that it's going to work out the way that it should, right?
Yeah, because we grow in confidence when we are in our presence, knowing that folks will come to us when it's the right time. And that's a tricky thing when it comes to needing to earn money. But actually, the gift is in letting go and being ready to receive, because the confidence that is exuded when we are not needing the payoff, when actually the payoff is being able to communicate and wait for that to be received, is such a gift. And it actually works out. It actually works out in business as well.
Yes, I agree. It does. Well, thank you so much, Esther. I'll definitely put a link in the show notes to your website, and that'll be a great way for people to be able to get a hold of you to find out more. So thank you so much. What's next for you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So today I've got some mentoring sessions, which I'm looking forward to. And it's a beautiful day here in the UK. It's autumn here. What's your weather like there?
Well, it's 6:30 p.m., so it's very dark. We're getting dark, but yeah, we're just about getting into the rainy season. So I'm a Canadian living in Australia. So
Yeah.
starting to get really warm, but essentially it was a beautiful sunny day, and yeah, and
Wow.
almost every day is.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I asked what it's like, because we're on opposing seasons, aren't we, here? So
Yeah, yeah, we are. So paradise is where I'm living, that's for sure. And that's why I charge for what I do.
absolutely, you need to
Yeah,
be able to afford to live in that setting. Definitely.
exactly. Thank you, Esther, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. It's lovely to speak to you, Lauren.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please do leave us a review where you listen to your podcast and share it with your friends. New episodes every Monday.